Allison Hope Weiner, and welcome back to Crime Time. Today's guest is Loni Coombs, former prosecutor and author. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm glad that we're back. I'm afraid that I heard from a lot of you guys. I was off last week because I was in New York, but we are back. I'm still watching the trial and looking at your comments. And in that vein, I just want to let everybody know that on this show, when we talk about Jodi Arias, we try to be objective and to look at both sides, and we're trying to give you a sense of what's going on inside the courtroom with an eye towards who is performing well as a prosecutor, what mistakes are being made, what good points are being made, but giving everybody kind of a fair shake. And if you're looking here for us just to try to cheerlead you against the defense and just to get to a conviction and to say it only be sort of one-sided, I mean, you're probably watching the wrong show. You should be watching Nancy Grace if you want to just see a bunch of people screaming about how guilty she is, because that's not going to happen here. Although, of course, she is guilty, right, Loni? I mean, we both are in agreement that she killed someone. She killed Travis Alexander.
She's in agreement on that, too. I'm just letting you know.
Yeah.
It's not a big mystery.
So, that being said, let's get to today's events. And let me give you a quick, for those of you who might be new to the show or have been not watching, and today's been a rather news-filled day with the explosions in Boston, which I'll be talking about in another segment. But just to keep you up to date, today Jodi Arias is accused of the June 4th, 2008 slaying of Travis Alexander. She sliced him and stabbed him 27 times, sliced his throat from ear to ear, and she also shot him in the head. And she is on trial, and she's been claiming that she acted in self-defense, claiming to be a battered woman. And in that regard, she's had two expert witnesses testify. The first one being what was his name?
Samuels.
Richard Samuels. And then the second one being Alice LaViolette. Right? So Alice has been on the stand, and today there were a number of motions made, another motion made for a mistrial, claiming that the prosecutor, Juan Martinez, had acted improperly in his questioning of the defense witness, Richard Samuels, prior to his testimony at trial. And the judge claimed that while the questioning by Mr. Martinez had been vigorous, that he had just been acting as a vigorous advocate for the state. So that was kind of pushed aside. What I wanted to get to was the more interesting motion, which was a motion to allow in a picture, an expert to testify about a picture of Travis Alexander. And that in this picture, which was taken while Travis was in the shower, the defense is claiming that if you look at the reflection in his eye, you could see Jodi Arias, and that she is not holding a knife, and that she's just simply taking pictures. And the idea is based on the timeline, based on what Mr. Martinez has argued, is that based on the timeline that things happen in such rapid succession, but that there was a sense that she had to have had that knife ready to go, because the next picture, when she starts stabbing him and the inadvertent pictures are taken, that she had the knife. And so, or you can also say that it also shows that something Jodi said was true. Right, some of her testimony is actually. So let me just say, the image captured in the shower just moments before he was stabbed and shot to death was at the heart of the hearing. And they wanted it enhanced, and there's been a stipulation. And the judge has ruled that they can stipulate to the fact that Jodi Arias was not holding a knife. Do you think this is like a big deal? I mean, we've been hearing, do you think this will have a big impact on what the jurors think about the case?
No, I mean, I don't. I found the expert who testified in the closed hearing this morning outside the presence of the jury fascinating. This guy and all the stuff that he does with photography and enhancing photographs and videos and audio and all of that stuff. I mean, I wish he was a witness in this case, because he was really good. And he held his own against Juan. Once again, in a closed hearing without the jury there, I am coming to the point where I don't think that Mr. Martinez, with all due respect, can actually question someone without being aggressive. I mean, especially with expert witnesses, when you're just trying to get information out of them, you don't need to be derogatory or demeaning or disrespectful, which he did. I mean, when the expert's trying to explain, he asks about a case, he's trying to explain the case. He goes, I know you want to talk about the fact that it was for the homicide detectives or whatever. I mean, those kinds of comments are so irrelevant and so unprofessional in my book. Not necessary, and I really, really wish the judge would stand up and do her job and say, you know what, Mr. Martinez, unnecessary. Cut those things out of your vocabulary. You don't need those in my courtroom.
And why don't you explain to our audience who doesn't seem to understand why this matters, why it matters that he might come off as unprofessional or obnoxious or rude?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why. First of all, you know, the courtroom is supposed to be held to a standard of excellence. You know, it is sort of where we put our civilized approach to society in our courtroom. That's why we don't decide cases out in the street, you know, and let people just come along and, you know, throw stones at whoever they think is guilty or not. You go into the courtroom, and every person in that courtroom, you know, the attorneys are considered officers of the court. When I stepped in and I was called an officer of the court, I took that as an honor and a privilege and a duty to maintain that standard of dignity and excellence in the courtroom, as all the attorneys are supposed to do. As far as in front of the jury, jurors may like it, they may not. But the most important thing that a prosecutor can do is be an objective, credible conduit to put that evidence in front of the jury. That's what the jury's supposed to do. They're supposed to be able to get this evidence from the prosecutor and determine it on what they see. And if a personality of a attorney on either side of the other, if the personality becomes such a big factor that it kind of blinds the jurors to the message or influence or taints that message, then the advocate's not doing their job, especially as a prosecutor.
Or even, how about, there have been some instances where a witness isn't able to remember something, and right away he goes, do you have a problem with your memory? I mean, and it's really more not an effort to make a point that this witness has been wrong about a number of things, which would be appropriate if they kept misstating facts. And you said here, and now you're saying this. It's not that kind of a thing. It's an attack, a personal attack.
Right.
And I know that some of our audience has said, well, why does it matter? But they've also said some of it's inadvertent. I mean, what would you say to that kind of an argument?
If it's inadvertent, then he needs to go back and practice some more. I mean, attorneys are supposed to be aware of their behavior in the courtroom. That's part of being an attorney. That's part of being a trial attorney. You don't get to go in there and just, you know, laugh and joke and, you know, I mean, it's not like you're in a club. You're in a court of law, and you're representing the people of Arizona in this case. So it shouldn't just be inadvertent. You should be very careful about what you're presenting. You know, you passed off on the second motion, and that was where we heard his questioning of Dr. Samuels in an interview that he conducted before the witness got on the stand. And even in that situation, where essentially the purpose of that is for him to be able to interview the doctor about what's in his report. It's not cross-examination. It's not an attack. It's not for him to put on a show in front of a jury. It is for him to get information and clarification about the report. And yet, even in that circumstance, Mr. Martinez was not able to restrain himself, and he started going after some really tangential, weird details that had nothing to do with the report. And even at one point, somebody goes, you know, this is being recorded. I mean, it was like, what are you doing here? This is really inappropriate.
But beyond that, it's bad lawyering.
Yeah.
If you're sitting with someone and you aren't in front of a jury and you want to find out everything in that report and everything they know that may not even be in that report, then you're polite. And this is what you do when you interview someone. You try to make them comfortable. You try to make them feel that they can trust you. And I know that he is going to be testifying for the other side, but there was no reason for them not to be friendly.
That's right. And that's the whole other part of this, and that is it's just not effective questioning. I mean, one of it is your credibility, but the other thing too is, like we've talked about, when you are interviewing someone, you use a lot of different tactics. You use cajoling, you use, you know, sarcasm, you use humor, you go in for the strike, then you pull back, you use, you know, you kind of ebb and flow. And Mr. Martinez doesn't do any of that. So I think he misses a lot of it. He also gets so caught up on these little personal skirmishes over there that he misses points that he should be making, questions where he should be following up on what the witness is actually saying, as opposed to, did you remember this or did you remember that? You know, he's missing a lot of really big points that he should be making.
I think that's true, and I think that I've always felt that most good trial attorneys have to have a healthy ego. They have to believe in themselves and think they're very good at what they do. But there comes a point where that ego gets in the way of doing a good job. And I think at this point, and thank goodness for the state of Arizona that this is a case where there's so much physical evidence to show that perhaps the self-defense argument is weak. It is weak, but there's so much evidence that shows that there's so many inconsistencies that he doesn't have to do that good of a job. But were the physical evidence not as strong, I think he'd be looking at maybe losing.
Because you'd be missing out on, so I mean, there's some of the juror questions, I'm like, okay, that's a question I wish I'd heard Mr. Martinez ask. Clear, concise, to the point, laid out the evidence, and the one waited for an answer. And that's the kind of questioning that the attorney should be doing.
I totally agree with you. Well, let's look at today at what's been going on. There's something else that has really been troubling me. Over the weekend, and even before we get to today's events, there has been almost kind of a lynch mob mentality growing about the defense expert Alice LaViolette. And it's there's been a lot of hate speech directed at her. There have been all kinds of comments online on Amazon.com about her book, and even that she's wrong, that she's not credible, that she's stupid. I mean, just direct attacks on her appearance. And what I wanted to do is also take a look at something. But even before we go into the clip, even HLN, or even I should say HLN, has either hopped on the bandwagon or been the leader of the bandwagon. There was an episode of Jane Velez Mitchell on Friday where she talked about how she's been the target of, when Jane Velez Mitchell talked about how Alice is the target of angry tweets during her testimony. And then she said one of the quotes was, Ms. LaViolette's belief is just as slippery as Jodi Arias. She could sit on her contacts and go bleep herself, was one of the tweets. Then I was watching the show, and they had a bunch of these experts, the guys in the boxes, a bunch of lawyers in boxes, talking about how LaViolette was so wrong. She's so wrong, and the jurors obviously know that she's wrong. So let's take a look at, they brought in an expert witness, a psychiatrist from New Orleans for some reason. I guess this is who they could get on air or wanted to be on air, who has no involvement with the case, no involvement with any of the people involved in the case. And frankly, I don't think I've even seen him before on HLN. But let's look at what he had to say about the expert witness.
Yeah, I think that as an expert witness, you have to have credibility. And it seems to me, based on these questions, that Ms. LaViolette has lost her credibility with the jury. Because when you have that many questions to an expert about something they should know and be able to tell you and educate you about, you're basically questioning everything that she said. So I think that the jurors are all on the same page here. I think that they do not buy a lot of what she said, and I think this does not bode well for the defense at all.
Okay, Loni, so now we've had a psychiatrist inform us of what the jurors are thinking. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's dangerous. One, I don't think you can ever tell what the jurors are thinking. I've said that over and over again.
This is based on their questions, and as far as we know, most of these, the majority of the questions are coming from only 6 jurors.
Yeah, I mean, you can, kind of tell what some of the jurors are thinking, whoever's writing the questions. But even then, you don't know if those questions are being written for them or because they think someone else on the jury might need something clarified. So it's clear that some of those questions are definitely questioning Alice LaViolette as an expert. There's some people who don't think that maybe she knows what she's talking about, or that she's biased towards Jodi, or that they just don't agree with her conclusion. I mean, as I've said before, I think that this is part of this is a perversion of the purpose for jury questions. This is not a purpose for the jurors to become attorneys. Like I said, I liked some of the questions from the jurors that I wish Mr. Martinez was asking. I don't like it when the juror's asking it, because that's not the purpose for the jury questions. They're not supposed to be showing their disgust or disdain for her opinion. That's not what the jury questions are for. It's for clarification. It's for, I didn't quite understand this. There were some questions that they went into trying to understand the difference between the domestic violence abuser and a stalker. And I thought that was very legitimate, because I don't think that the attorneys really covered that very well. It is different. They're different things. There's different factors that go into them. And so that's why she could say that she thought that, so-and-so was an abuser and so-and-so wasn't a stalker. What I thought was interesting, and I wish somebody had asked the question from the attorneys or even the jurors, was that she determined that Jodi wasn't a stalker because Travis wasn't afraid. Okay. But isn't there just stalking behavior regardless of how the victim or the target responds.
One would think, because I mean, a lot of people get killed before they realize they're being stalked.
Yeah, and so I wish somebody had gone
I mean, it's
into
too
that.
late when they figure it out.
That's right. I wish they'd clarified that and kind of separated that out. That was something I never thought was really clarified by anybody. But she was trying to get to the point, but these are different factors, they're different things, etc. So, you know, I do
and that's a failing of the defense as well.
Yeah.
That they weren't,
Both
I mean,
sides.
and both sides. I mean, I want everybody to understand. I mean, I think the defense are doing a somewhat better job because they're not a one-note team where they're always angry and they try to, you know, in that sense, when we're talking about Martinez, they win in other areas in terms of preparing their experts for cross, or I mean, what we saw with Dr. Samuels, that was a disaster.
Well, and I thought the defense definitely should have told Alice LaViolette, explain to them what a hypothetical is and tell her not to argue every hypothetical. That is a common cross-examination technique for experts. You lay out factors, you say, please assume these factors, now what would your opinion be? And she kept saying, well, I don't know if that's true, I don't know if that's true. Well, that's what a hypothetical is. And her attorneys during the break should have said, that's what a hypothetical is, don't fight that. You're wasting time by arguing whether you think that's true or not. That's not the purpose for the question. That's the kind of thing that you should tell your witnesses before they get on the stand to help facilitate the process. I also thought that she really struggled, and it was such a blatant difference between where she'd say yes or no when it was being, you know, the defense attorneys and the prosecutors was a totally different thing. So I think both sides really failed with Alice LaViolette. I will say this, as far as what people are doing outside of the courtroom to attack her. There's a crime called witness intimidation. There's a reason for that. We've got free speech rights, you can have your opinions, but there's a reason why we protect witnesses who come to the courtroom to testify. They are critical to the justice system. And I have seen many witnesses who had their lives put on the line because they knew that they might get killed or their families might get killed if they came into the courtroom. But there was no way we were going to put our murder away unless these people committed themselves to come in and do that. Okay. So there's a reason why we have a crime against witness intimidation. For people to go after Alice LaViolette, this expert witness who has come in and testified, whether you like her opinion or not, whether you agree with it or not, is such an inappropriate abuse of this system. And I hope that people will step back and say, you know what, if anyone in my life ever has to go through this process where for some reason, whatever reason, they have to be in the system and we need people to come in and testify on their behalf, I hope that somebody doesn't come and intimidate the person that could help my friend, my family member, or myself. Because that's not what the system's for. And it's, what good does it do for anyone to attack her and her professional life and her personal demeanor? I mean, come on, people. Let's act like, you know, human beings here and have some humanity. If you don't like her opinion, okay, say you don't like her opinion. But let's kind of elevate our level here of civilization and not go down that path of, you know, vigilanteism where we attack witnesses when we don't like what they say.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that people need to understand too, what if Jodi Arias was a victim of abuse? Let's say it was a different trial and we could totally, and this was going on. Wouldn't you want her to have somebody who would speak up for her, who wouldn't be afraid of this kind of a circus and being attacked? This woman ended up in the emergency room. She's, you know, and then somebody actually said on HLN, if she really believed in what she was saying, she wouldn't have any anxiety about it.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I have to tell you, I had to take the stand in a case just for a few questions. It was nothing to do with, it was just a procedural thing. And it is a frightening experience to be up there with the judge and the attorneys, and you feel like, I mean, I wasn't even an important part. It was just kind of like a few yes or no's, and yet I was like, are they trying to trick me, or what are they saying? You know, and
this is your arena.
That's right, and I do it all. I mean, all day long I sit there and I question people, and then here she is, day after day after day, and you could just see. I mean, physically, you can see she's not doing well. I mean, I don't think anybody would after the type of attacks that she's been taking in the courtroom and outside of the courtroom. It's, you know, I don't know what people think they're doing by attacking her this way.
I'll tell you, there was, I heard Joey Jackson on HLN said, it's debated. Is this free speech, expert panel? This is what Jane Velez Mitchell said. Or is it this harassing or even tampering with the witness? I'll start with Joey Jackson. And he said, well, it certainly isn't tampering. You could argue that people are over the top on it, but let me just say this. The point is that people are allowed to freely express what their views are. People are engaged in this trial, and when you have an expert that gives an opinion that's so divorced from reality, it affects people, and they want to know why. And then you question the bias with regard to a jury question. Why are you looking and smiling at her? And what does that have to do with the trial? And of course, he's referring to the fact that she looked over and allegedly smiled at Jodi Arias. And the final point to it, Jane, is her response to Mr. Martinez. Be appropriate. Don't say, I'm going to give you a timeout. Don't say you should talk to me as I speak to you. And Velez Mitchell says, well, okay, but it is appropriate. And then he goes, answer the question. He just keeps talking. And then another witness says, look, this is not a sporting event, and we have to remember that people's lives are at stake here. This is a paid expert. She's a professional. And then he goes to say, it's disgraceful. And I have to tell you, Velez Mitchell says, I don't think there's anything outrageous and disgraceful about reporting somebody going to the hospital, but that's what Sandler was objecting to, that they were reporting about her going to the hospital, that people are going after her. So somebody did stick up for her. But I got to tell you something. I mean, watching this go down and watching professionals who are used to being in in trials and used to being in the courtroom and watching juries like Joey Jackson and these other talking about how she is so wrong, I mean, that she should be attacked. And that's what you get for being wrong.
See, that's scary. I have no problem with people saying she's wrong. I have no problem with people saying, where's she looking? Why does she keep looking that way? I do think it's the height of hilarity that people attack her for saying, I'm going to give you a timeout when Mr. Martinez is sitting there waiting until she's finished and goes, are you done? Are you done now? I mean, really? Are we going to sit there now, way back and forth? Well, because he's the attorney, he's allowed to sit there and say things like that, make comments, side comments that have nothing to do with the testimony, but she can't. I mean, so this is a very disturbing part of this trial that I have not seen before. I've seen people, talk about what's going on in the courtroom and attack them, but I haven't seen this kind of outside swell of, leaving hostile messages on her voicemail at her work and, trying to attack her book for no other reason than they don't like her testimony. I mean, you're now trying to mess up her livelihood.
And she spent her life helping people.
I know.
I mean, and maybe she knows something. This is the thing that I think people have to understand. It's that she's answering the questions that they're giving her. She's trying to answer them. And yes, it's been kind of disastrous, but like you, I have to say, I'm not like you, but one point that you made, some of this is the judge's fault. Somebody should have, the way the questions are being asked, the way they're interrupting each other, every once in a while, somebody will have to object for the judge to say, let her finish, instead of saying, Mr. Martinez, would you please wait until the witness has finished her answer? Or, I mean, the way she was treated for an older woman, I mean, who is respected in her field, to be treated like she is an imbecile. That's the way he's talking to her. And it would take somebody with incredible self-control not to at some point say, hey, stop talking to me like that. Because it's not a license for him to treat her with complete and total disrespect because she's on the other side.
That's right.
And I'm wondering if some of that isn't related, I mean, to just all of his inability to do his job properly. I mean, all the other mistakes that he's made, this is just, to me, another evidence of him needing to study more about what he does.
Well, it's too bad because there were a couple of days last week on cross-examination where there were a couple of hours, maybe, 30-minute increments where he calmed down and he actually made some really good points. And I was like, great. We're making some points here. And he was able to show that, the position that she was taking and how it didn't match the factors of evidence that he was bringing up without attacking her, with letting her finish her answers. And then the jury can sit back and go, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. This wasn't like a little tit for tat. This was I heard what she had to say and I don't agree with it.
It's just what we were talking about with the stalking, that she clearly could have, and that he clearly, in a calm way, could have shown, haven't you had cases where somebody was stalking and the victim didn't know about it until it was too late, or didn't know about it until they were attacked? I mean, there are things, I mean, and I want to make this clear to our audience, that you know, are really open to cross-examination.
Oh,
She
yeah.
has not, there have been some problems with her testimony in the sense that there are always problems where you can always take another side.
Right. And whether she gives you the answer you want or not, you make that point by you lay out all of these things, and you still wouldn't say she's a stalker simply because Travis didn't respond to. So, but you know, and you kind of go through it and you let her answer, and then that message gets across to the jury. You get it in different ways. You don't just have to pound it out of them, you know.
I'm sorry, but you probably would make more mistakes if you let her finish.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean,
that's been my experience.
Well, and we wouldn't know because they get off on these, you know, personal skirmishes. But the frustrating thing was, I actually saw some points there where Mr. Martinez did exercise this skillful cross-examination and got some good responses.
Well, let's take a look at some of the actual testimony. I want to watch LaViolette in action, where she is asked a question by the jury. These are some of the jury questions, and about whether or not Jodi was manipulative. And I wonder what you think of her answer here. Let's look at the clip.
Please explain why you feel Jodi is not manipulative, either before or after the killing, based on the review of statements and interviews.
Based on the information that I have, I don't see a pattern of manipulation in the way I would define it. I haven't seen that in terms of her trying to, and I'm not sure exactly what this is in reference to, so it's a hard question for me to answer, but I think anybody can be manipulative. What I look for are patterns, and I didn't see them in the materials that I read in terms of her relationship with Mr. Alexander. So I'm not sure how else to answer that.
And I mean, I think, first of all, they're not asking really in terms of her relationship with Mr. Alexander. They're asking of whether or not, I mean, there is the underlying current for the questions that we have heard. Did she manipulate you into believing her?
Right.
And so I'm curious, what do you think? Do you think that answers like that answer are really, I mean, making her not a good witness? I mean, sort of purposely misunderstanding the question, sort of purposely evading different things, and not really giving an answer that's direct. I mean, she doesn't think she was manipulated, so why not say it?
Well, I think she does. She said that also at different times, and sometimes I think she does kind of misdirect her answers. Sometimes I'm not sure if it's intentional or not. But I think at some point you just have to say, okay, in my mind she was manipulated. In my mind, she doesn't get that, and leave it at that. You don't have to force her to
admit.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that comes from, because that's not the reality of the world. You never, if you and I disagree,
TV.
I'm not going to sit here and shake you until you agree with me. And the courtroom's not that way either. I mean, I guess people are used to seeing that on TV, and maybe that's where they get that idea from. That's not the point of it. She has this opinion. What you want to do is point out why you think that's a ridiculous opinion. Like, you know, the fact that she doesn't think Jodi Arias is a liar. Well, honestly, I mean, every juror saw her lie on the stand and admit she lied numerous times. So really, the fact that Alice doesn't see her as a liar does weaken her credibility. Okay, good. So that's good. That
speaks volumes.
That's exactly. It speaks volumes for itself. And instead of pounding her to say, "Of course she's a liar, don't you see it?" Just argue it in closing argument. She didn't see it. What does that tell you about her credibility and her concluding opinion? It's probably missing a few things, just like her opinion that Jodi doesn't lie. So that's the way you argue it, instead of beating people up that are sitting on the stand.
I think you make a really good point on that, because I think that when I look at Martinez, I think he learned prosecution techniques from television. Like, he's a Law and Order prosecutor. And I think, I mean, from the series Law and Order, that I think that he is, expecting her to stand up and go, "You're right, she lied to me."
Yes. Oh, now I see clearly I was wrong. You know, she's not going to. And she didn't see all this stuff in the courtroom. She didn't see a lot of this stuff. And she didn't interview people. I mean, honestly, Alice LaViolette has probably seen a lot less of Jodi than the jurors have, or we have, you know, and so her opinion might be over here shaped like this because she didn't see all of the other different things that have come into the trial.
So you establish, which he has, the things that she based her opinion on.
Right.
You let her sit there and say she doesn't lie. she didn't lie to me. She wasn't manipulative. She's an abused woman. She wasn't a stalker, and let the jury just take it from there. And then you could say, and then we had the defense expert who said the following: we heard her lie. We've heard testimony that she lied 3 times. Apparently, Miss LaViolette didn't hear any of that.
Yeah,
I mean, and they just do it like that.
Exactly. And then the jurors go, yeah, exactly. Okay. And then you've saved everybody 3 weeks of testimony of trying to beat an admission out of her that she's not going to give.
And that's why, I should tell the audience, why we are so frustrated with Ms. Martinez, because what he's doing, it's not only that it's annoying, it's ineffective. I mean, yes, he probably will end up with a guilty verdict, but it won't be because of what he did. I could tell you that much. It'll probably just be because the cops did an excellent job of gathering evidence from the crime scene and putting it all together for him. Because
and Jodi eventually admitted she did it. You know, this isn't a whodunit. It's a what is it? I mean, yeah.
Well, what I was trying to say is that the cops really got her in a position where she had no...
They did great. That's right. They did great interviews of her. Yeah.
So, okay. So now let's look at this is the most disturbing jury question. I mean, and it's hard to narrow it down to one, but that I've seen in a while of any witness, because to me, I don't understand why the judge allowed this in. So maybe you can explain it to me after we take a look at it. This is the clip where the jury asked a question of Miss LaViolette about who was really the abuser in that relationship.
On the one side, we have demeaning multiple verbal slurs, a slap, a shove, a chokehold, and a lunge perpetrated on Jodi. On the other, we have a gunshot to the head, a 4-inch deep slit throat, and close to 30 stab wounds delivered by Jodi to Travis. Is not the perpetrator of the greatest domestic violence Jodi?
I think what happened to Mr. Alexander is horrific.
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
I think that self-defense...
Objection, beyond the court's order, beyond the scope of the question.
There's no order of I'm going to sustain the objection. The question is not the perpetrator of the greatest domestic violence Jodi?
No.
Well, you got to know, or a yes, finally.
I know. How unusual. Why was that question allowed? A summary question.
No.
This is a summary of the evidence question.
That's a closing argument question. That's a prosecution cross-examination question. It would have been a great cross-examination question. That's the question I wanted to hear from Mr. Martinez. I don't want to hear it from the jurors. The jurors are taking a position and you know, in giving their closing argument and then putting her up to, you know, accept or to deny it. It's not an appropriate juror question for the purpose of what the juror questions are supposed to be. So I don't...
Isn't there an admonition also that is given to the jury by the judge that you're not to form any opinions until
Yes.
the end of this case? And now we've just seen a question where they've clearly formed an opinion. On this side, we have this evidence. On that side, so where do you know?
I mean, you know, the benefit of the doubt given to the juror was that maybe they never got the answer out of all of the cross-examination and direct examination, so they really wanted to know that. Hey, you know what? How can you, because just on the face of it, you just say, hey, you know what? Why wouldn't you call Travis, you know, why wouldn't you call her the abuser? I mean, all the stuff she did was a lot more violent and a lot more abusive than any allegation of what Travis did. Why aren't you calling, you know, both of them abusers? I mean, just, you know, ask it that way as opposed to laying out your closing arguments for and here are all my facts, you know, and here's my chart and diagram. Now, you know, just pull it up from the jury box.
That made I would have like, that made my blood run cold, because I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that the question was allowed. But I also was concerned, this witness, Alice LaViolette, has said over and over again that the abuse went way beyond these specific discrete acts. So they're saying we have this evidence. It absolutely works right around everything she just testified to, which was there was an escalation, and just sort of the whole idea of how you know, abuse, how this type of abuse works. I mean, and that there was an escalation, and the more she tried to pull away, the more angry he got, and that a lot of it is She could decipher from the way they spoke to each other that it had nothing to do with discreet, And so I have to say, it shows that this juror thinks that she has been completely ineffective in even trying to describe what actually happened to Jodi, because those discrete items of evidence that have been named by the juror in that question don't encompass everything that Alice LaViolette testified to.
Right. Yeah. And that's part of what I wish, when you were going back to that, I wish that proper cross-examination would have included that Mr. Martinez laid out all of those factors in a very calm, precise, calculated manner to show all of the things that Jodi did that follows the exact same pattern that she has ascribed to Travis, so that she couldn't have wiggled out and said, no, it was only, Travis who was the abuser, not Jodi. I mean, go through it step by step and go through and mirror exactly what she said about Travis being the abuser. That's the kind of strategic, laser-focused cross-examation that is effective, and you could have done that with this expert.
You were waiting for it.
I wanted it. I was praying for it. I probably should have mailed it to him. Here, read these. But it didn't happen.
They said it on television, other shows too. What would be really smart for Mr. Martinez to do here would be but instead he ended up talking about her being a stalker instead of an abuser.
Yeah. And even the stalker stuff, yes, which then she was able to say stalking is different than abusing. But he never even clarified. She would just say, no, she's not a stalker, because Travis wasn't afraid. But let's go through each one. Would you be afraid if someone climbs through your doggy door? And by her not saying that, it opened the door for him to bring in more evidence about the stalking stuff that had not come in before. I mean, I would have been jumping for joy if I was Mr. Martinez, and really exploiting all of those different factors and hitting them over and over again. Forget the part that Travis wasn't responding, because that's where Alice kept going, and keep hitting those factors of what she was doing. Jodi's behavior. Let's focus on Jodi's behavior here.
And just let her lay it out for you. Ask her. And then what else did she do? What else did you read that she did? What else have you seen that she did? And I think you make it's another interesting, and I mean, a point that I agree with is that there is no organization to their cross-examination.
Right.
And again, we are talking about, this is a skill, this is why we're both here talking about this trial. You were taught a way to organize things so that the jury can get to the evidence and make the right decision. And he is so all over the place and so engaged in that bickering about nonsense and word choice, instead of have her lay out all the things that Jodi did to this guy, and then just leave it, and then when it comes to your closing, go down. Even their expert admitted she did this, and did that,
exactly,
and did this. Okay, so that's not stalking. Then what? It looks a lot like what Jodi. I mean, he could say that, and this is what we have. We have Jodi doing this, and we have Travis doing this.
Yes. I also wish he had clarified. I mean, this is the kind of stuff, I want everything very clear for the jury. There's three kinds of abuse. There's verbal abuse, there's sexual abuse, and there's physical abuse. And by lumping it all together and saying Travis was an abuser, well, that's not very precise. Let's go through that. Okay, because what she really based a lot of her opinion on were the verbal texts.
That's correct.
Okay, maybe they were abusive. Okay, and they're right there in writing, and they might have been offensive to people. Okay, so maybe we can see that. The sexual abuse, she didn't even really touch, because she's old-fashioned. She doesn't like to ask those questions. What in the world? How can you be an expert and then you don't get into the sexual abuse? Sexual abuse is a very big component of deciding if there's domestic violence. There's those three components. So she really didn't even get into all the details on that one, because she was uncomfortable. Then the third one is the physical abuse, and for that, all she went on was what Jodi gave her. And that's where so lay it out very clearly for the jury so that they can go through that process in their head, and when they're back in the jury room, instead of just saying, well, she said he was an abuser. Okay, but what was she basing that on? Let's get down to really specific examples of what it was and why she kept going back to he was an abuser. Okay, so maybe the texts, but what about the other stuff?
And don't you think that these are kind of the ABCs of prosecuting, being clear? Because this is something that people, when they watch a trial, they're like, oh, it's so boring. They're going through everything so slowly and so methodically. It's so, in the end, everything will be carefully laid out and verified.
Because when the jurors go back in that jury room, and anybody who's been back there, that you have all of that evidence, you have to organize it somehow, and you have to be able to go through it in some kind of process and manner where everybody feels comfortable, instead of it just be glossing over. Wasn't he an abuser? Wasn't he an abuser? Well, let's lay out the facts. So you want to kind of go through that and show the jury how you think through it in your own mind, so that they have they might not follow exactly what you say, but they have an idea of how to tackle this. this.
And I think Martinez started to talk to her about her refusal to discuss certain sexual topics with Jodi, and then he got angry.
I know!
And it would have been so effective to just sit there and do just what you were saying.
Isn't sexual abuse like 1/3 component of making your decision if this was domestic violence or not? And yet you were uncomfortable covering that. Okay, so right there, we've lost a big part of what you would base your opinion on, right? Okay.
And he could have just said, you didn't want to talk to her about the KY jelly.
Right.
You didn't want to talk to her about this. You didn't want to talk to her about that. I understand. It's because, and she says it, and then he just leaves it instead of going and humiliating her and trying to make her kind of sound, embarrassed. And I mean, that wasn't necessary.
No,
just
it's
the answer. Just the answer. You're old-fashioned, aren't you? Yes, I am. Okay. On we go.
Right.
So then he says, unfortunately, the defense picked an expert that's too old-fashioned, who's going to claim that sexual abuse occurred here, but doesn't want to talk about it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And
that's
to me,
what you
that's
argue.
rather...
Exactly, and it can be a very effective closing argument.
I felt sorry for her. I mean, I wonder, as an ex, it was an odd moment for me, even watching that, like that she didn't want to discuss the specifics of sexual. I mean, because the whole, I don't want to take you back to the anal.
I know, I hate it too, because it's very graphic. But on the other hand, if you've been doing domestic violence counseling for, that's a very big part of the domestic violence abuse.
I would have made her sit there and say, well, didn't she like it? So
Yeah.
Didn't Jodi get into it with this? I mean, I'm sorry. It was a wasted opportunity.
Yeah.
And let's look at, and then there is one other thing that I wanted to talk to you about besides the whole free speech thing. I wanted to talk about, so we've talked about the juror questions, but I also wanted to talk about the issue of the tweeting and the big federal case that's been made by the media out of the fact Jodi's tweeting. Not only did she murder someone, but she's got access to Twitter. How outrageous is that? And I said to somebody who, and one of our viewers actually wrote me about it, and I said, you know what? She hasn't been convicted yet, so she still has relative privileges that the rest of us enjoy, although she is behind bars and has no physical freedom and has to follow the rules of the Maricopa County jail house. So I'm wondering, where do you come out on the whole Twitter controversy?
Well, I have a lot of different opinions. Yeah. If I was the prosecutor, I'd love it, because anytime you can get a defendant to be talking, great, they're going to say something, and it can be used against her if they can prove it's her. It was interesting because this came up in a motion this morning, and both sides kind of pulled their punch. The prosecutor said, well, my boss said to bring this up to you, but I'm not going to, investigate it. And then the defense said, well, she has her free speech rights, but, I don't know if she's doing it. I mean, they both kind of just step back and didn't want to deal with it. One, I think that the defense attorneys are stupid to let her do it if she's doing it. I would have sat her down and said, what are you thinking? Did you learn from your 48 hours interview and all the other interviews? People aren't going to appreciate this. It's offensive to the victim's family. It's offensive to everyone. And if the jury, somehow hears that might be happening, which they're not supposed to hear. But it doesn't do you any good. You may be venting, about what's going on in the process, but it may be fun for you, but it's not going to help your case at all. So think about that.
Yeah, she's saying the prosecutor has a small man complex. Although I have some sympathy towards that point. I have to say that what I've seen in this case, and it looks like to me that this defense team has had no control over their defense witness, and I think it has been to their detriment.
Yeah. That's right, and they're probably saying, look, you make your own decision and you'll live with that decision. They're not the ones that are sitting in jail right now, and they're not the ones that will sit in jail. So she can make those decisions, and if this is her last hurrah, and if she continues to do it, whatever. I mean, that's up to her. But I think it's really stupid.
I'm sorry, you do think it's really stupid?
Oh yeah.
Well, I have dealt with and talked to a lot of criminal defense attorneys, and generally they won't even keep a client who talks to the media. I mean, we saw that with Harlan Braun when Robert Blake spoke to 2020. They generally will leave a case. I mean, because of the problems. Every time she talked, and all those days in interrogation where she kept talking and talking.
Yeah, where were her attorneys when she did the 48 hours? All those interviews. I mean, I don't get it. I don't get why she was, but she has, and she's insisted on doing it. It's Jodi. That's what we know about her. That's one consistent thing we know about her.
Do you think that to me, it looks like a continuation of all the behavior where she has not listened to anyone, and it's gonna, and part of the reason she's ending up in jail. the main part of the reason are those interrogations that went on for 3 days. I mean, I think if she does ultimately get convicted, I will think, as I've said before, that it's that rather than Martinez's questioning of her and his case here that landed her in jail. It was her own blabitude.
Yeah. It's her narcissistic ego that cannot shut up, that she has to keep talking and she has to keep putting on the makeup and, fixing the hair and playing the role. I mean, that's what she wants to do. And, she probably knows, that she's never getting out. Maybe she's so, I don't know. But this is her stage. She has the spotlight right now, and she's going to play it for all she can.
Let me ask you one last question in terms of what's actually going on there in the trial. We have given the judge initially some props for how she was handling things, or not exactly her, but just the fact that this was a civilized trial and the attorneys seemed to be relating well to each other, and there wasn't the kind of histrionics and anger and that have marked other famous trials of the century. At this point in the trial, watching the different motions being made, watching how the judge is handling the jury questions, what kind of a mark would you give her at this point?
I'm going to give her a D+, simply because I'm seeing, and part of it isn't her fault per se. This type of media attention in a case is something that, before OJ we didn't anticipate. And, I saw Judge Ito, who was a very well-respected judge in LA. In fact, he was supposed to be going to the appellate bench right after that case. Very well-liked, well-respected. And once the glare of the media hit like no one had ever seen before, everyone changed under that spotlight. Okay, but it's been however many years since OJ, and we've seen big cases since then. And jurists and attorneys need to recognize that this is a whole other part of the trial that you need to think about and anticipate and be prepared for when you're doing a high-profile case. And because of that, I think she may be fine as a judge on other cases, but in this case, and seeing where the public humiliation of the witnesses is going, and the way that the Mr. Martinez's nature, while it may be effective in other cases, is stirring stuff up in this case and being ineffective. I mean, there is an objection for argumentative questioning. It's in the rules of evidence. It's there for a reason, and I'd be using it, and I'd be sustaining it, and I'd be calling those attorneys up and saying, that's what the judge does. The judge is supposed to set the demeanor in the courtroom, and I think the demeanor in this courtroom has not been professional, and now it is going out into the rest of the people watching this case, and it's affecting the witnesses outside of the courtroom. And who has control of that? There's one person who has the authority to control that, and that's the judge. And so that's why I say that judge needs to stand up. She needs to stand up and have a backbone. I can't believe that I haven't heard anybody
on any of these shows talking about the fact that there is a social media lynch mob going after these witnesses, and that's the judge's place to say, hey, we will protect our witnesses. We will not allow the attorneys in my courtroom to disrespect those witnesses, because they kind of open the door to the rest of the world disrespecting. The way with Juan Martinez said things about her, you hate men, don't you? Like all these kind of irrelevant. Yeah. I mean, do they always ask a sexual abuse expert if they hate men? Right. I mean, she counsels men and she counsels women. I mean, it's absurd. And she had to.
Those are personal attacks.
Totally personal.
Extremely inappropriate.
And I would say that if Jodi Arias, was complete, I would say it even more if she, was totally innocent. But I would say that whoever side, if there was any witness for the prosecution that the defense was like name calling like that judge should have stepped in and said, that is, come to, had them approach. She has them at the bench every couple of seconds while they're visiting. Maybe she should mention to Juan Martinez or to any of the attorneys who speak to a witness that way to knock it off.
That's right. And it has nothing to do with them being able to put on the case the way they want to put it on. She's not affecting that. She's affecting the demeanor of the courtroom and the professional interaction.
Well, let me just say one last thing, and it's somewhat related to the issue of social media lynch mob. We've been seeing a lot of cases now about young people who were raped, and we saw this in the Steubenville rape case, where pictures of that rape, either in progress or after the fact, pictures related to the crime, are posted on social media, and that they call it slut shaming, where they'll show pictures of girls who have had a crime committed against them, and then they post these all over social media. media, and everybody starts to beat up on the girl rather than the perpetrators of the crime. And we have another story of a teenage girl from Nova Scotia in Canada was driven to suicide after photos of an alleged sexual assault led to her being shunned and harassed by her peers. She died Sunday in a hospital after trying to hang herself. And the mom said that she was gone today. I guess her name, Retouch, I don't know how to say it exactly, I think that's correct, is gone today because of the 4 boys that thought that raping a 15-year-old girl was okay and to distribute a photo to ruin her spirit and reputation would be fun. And she was the victim of alleged gang rape that occurred in 2011 after she attended a party. And the 4 boys who attacked and took pictures of the assault and shared it with their classmates. We have another case of another teenage girl whose photos of her assault were posted online, and then again we have the Steubenville rape case and many, many others. A lot of these cases we have charges of these boys coming a great deal after the actual crime. It's the opposite of rush to judgment. Really, really, really not rush to judgment cases, and we have children dying. And to me, it's another instance of, I mean, right now we have somebody who's a professional witness, who's a witness and a professional on the stand, being shamed and attacked and harassed and being abused through social media, Alice LaViolette. But these are children, and if Alice LaViolette is having trouble handling it, can you imagine what it's like for these kids? I mean, what are your thoughts on how the country is responding and also how law enforcement is responding to these cases?
Well, I obviously feel very strongly about this. Why I wrote the book about You're Perfect and Other Lies Parents Tell, because...
Slow it down so everybody can know. Loni wrote a book, and we've talked about this before in the show, You're Perfect and Other Lies Parents Tell.
Yeah, there was a trend, and this was, you know, starting 10, 15 years ago. These kids who come into the courtroom, and I write the reasons why I feel it's happening. Part of it is the self-entitlement generation, and also part of it is this social media wave of attention, this obsession for attention. And because they don't have empathy, because that also comes out of all of this social interaction, a lack of empathy, a callousness towards other people's feelings, a self-entitlement that everything I do is great and perfect and there's no consequences, and then I want to put it all out there for everybody to see because I'm going to get attention, and that is the goal, is to get attention as opposed to ever think of anyone else's feelings or consequences for your actions. You're seeing this more and more. And these are kids that have, you know, most likely very involved parents, you know, a lot of wonderful advantages given to them educationally and otherwise, and yet they're so driven to have this attention on the social media and the lack of consequences, etc., that they're doing these things that are criminal and having life and death consequences on their victims and their targets. I mean, it was, you know, the school bus bullies. I talk about that, where they were attacking the grandma, and they were doing it because they were making a video they wanted to show their friends. And now you have all of this wave of high school boys who are committing sexual assaults on girls and videotaping it and posting it, and law enforcement is still moving slow on this. And they're like, well, I don't know, can we identify it? Did she consent? Did she not consent? You know, law enforcement's got to pick up on it. They've got to really be aware of these crimes that are being perpetuated by this social media mentality. And parents have got to be on top of it too. You've got to start teaching your kids about consequences. You've got to start teaching them about empathy for other people's feelings and about this obsession for attention. You know, do it for good things, not for bad things.
I mean, I think that when you look at the way the world, I mean, our world in the United States, or whoever's watching this, has reacted to what's happening to Alice LaViolette with social media bullying, that it totally explains that nobody's yelling at their kids about this, because the parents are engaging in it now. I mean, and adults are posting things about this woman, and I think there's some sort of absolution that they feel with the anonymity of posting horrible things on the net. And with the children, yes, ultimately if police get involved, they will find out who's posting what. But there is also a disconnect between, well, I posted it, but nobody's going to know it's me. And when the parents are doing the same kind of behavior, it's kind of filtering down. How could we expect anything less, given what we're seeing at the adult level here in this case? I mean, to me, yes, it's not, they're not posting a crime, but they're harassing and bullying and being vindictive and mean to somebody who's simply out there stating an opinion. They could say they disagree, but they're going personally after her.
Right. I mean, what's the difference between, like, on Facebook when, you know, a group of kids decide to go after the one outcast and everybody jumps on the bandwagon and attacks her, or, you know, here's Alice LaViolette. I mean, she's doing something that she was subpoenaed to do. She's getting paid for it, but that's what, you know, she's an expert, and everybody's also jumping on the bandwagon and going after her in personal attacks.
I think law enforcement needs to recognize that beyond the actual assault here, that there's crime upon crime upon crime, and that there's got to be additional penalties and charges for perpetuating this crime through the social media, and that they need to look after one of these assaults to see if there is a social media component to it. And I think that's where, I mean, it's almost like an afterthought. They should just assume at this point, because there is such, as you said, a need within these children and a lot of our society for that kind of attention, that every time they commit a crime, they want to broadcast it. I mean, they don't even see it as...
They don't see it as a crime. They see it as getting attention. They see it as the table tosser on the reality show. You know, I'm going to get more attention. I'm going to get the bigger contract if I toss the table. So that's what they're doing. I mean, you know, we've spawned that by our reality shows.
I know. So anyway, I want to thank you for being here, Loni, and I thank you for your comments today. I got myself, I mean, I feel really strongly about it, so it just, you know, I get a little bit carried away when we're talking about it. But I want to tell our audience that if you want to see a show like today where we actually talk about, you know, the downside towards this kind of mob mentality, this is the place to come, because that's what we're seeing here. And we saw it with Casey Anthony too. I mean, the court system came to a verdict, but all along the way there was outrage by the announcers, and everybody didn't see it coming. You know, I mean, the verdict was such a surprise to everyone. I mean, I think you have to look at trials about what's actually happening in the courtroom, and you have to understand that the way our system works, what Loni was saying, is that we hold those people to a higher standard than you person on the street. I mean, there's a certain decorum and a way to behave and a certain civility that is indigenous to that place. It's supposed to be.
That's right.
So anyway, so stay with us. We're going to keep watching the Jodi Arias trial and bringing you our thoughts. And I will say, I thank you, Loni, because you brought up a lot of things that I didn't even think about today, but it makes me more upset. I mean, I know we have somebody who is on trial here for her life. It's serious business. And she's entitled to the best defense, even if it is paid for by the taxpayers, just as her prosecution is paid for by the taxpayers.
That's right. It's due process. That's what we all agreed to when we, you know, the Constitution.
It's quaint, but it's still, hopefully, still the law. So thank you for joining us, and keep the comments and tweets and everything coming. And Loni and I are watching, and we're going to be discussing a lot of your comments like we did today. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Crime Time.
Ah!